So this is yeah, I don't know what him.
Okay. Hello, everybody on the internet. We're getting into our Bible study again, Leviticus and Matthew. So I do have a little review again to go through, but we'll go with your questions, hopefully. But let's start with prayer. Okay. Heavenly Father, once again, we call on you, and in your grace, we know you hear us. Thank you for hearing us. We ask you to bless this time together now as we move through this hour, that we would get the right questions and the right responses to show your grace and your love and your wisdom and just your plan as it unfolds. Thank you so much, God, for revealing yourself to us, for giving all this information. Help us, Lord, to have the wisdom with your grace to understand it. Thank you, Lord. Be with us now as this hour unfolds. Amen. Those of you on the internet, I'm sorry I didn't have the capacity to do that because I'm not the tech guy. But for everybody who's live in house right now, I handed out 2 pages, front and back, for y'all got front and back. I keep going back over this idea about the Suzerain Vassal Treaty, and I can't emphasize it enough because that's what this was all about. The whole thing, Genesis leading up through into Deuteronomy, is retelling the story, is laying out the standard treaty. And one of the things I keep going back to this year, I rediscovered it. It's the stipulations, because we're so used to thinking it's the law. God's so judgmental, it's so harsh, and we're criticizing Christianity. It's all the do this and don't do that and stuff. And it's like, think of it in terms of stipulations. God's saying, I'm willing to be your God and your king, but here's the deal. And any suzerain vassal, the suzerain is the big dog. He's got all the power. He's got the big army. He could crush you if he wanted to. So it's not like I'm going to argue with him. I mean, this is the deal. If you don't want the deal, fine. Think about stipulations like when you're buying a house. These are the stipulations. Bank's going to give you this much money. Here's your rate. Do you accept the terms? Okay, we get a deal. Not, go somewhere else. You're buying a car. Again, you have car loan stipulations. And if you agree to the stipulations, then you're bound by the stipulations. So coming under the law as a bar mitzvah, when a young Jewish person goes through a bar, it's under the law. He is now accountable to Yahweh. So there are rights. These are the terms of the condition and the conditions of the stipulation, the law. So the one page you have says the standard features of a vassal treaty. In this particular, these are from my notes when I was in seminary, the preamble. And if you look at it, this is Exodus 20, verse 1 and 2. The historical prologue is Genesis 1 all the way up to that. As I said before, they'd always have whatever the history was between the two nations. So there's the prologue. There's the preamble to this stuff. The stipulations. You have the central general stipulations. We call them the 10 Commandments, and they're repeated in Deuteronomy 5. Then you have the detailed stipulations, and that's what we're looking at, Exodus 21 all the way through Leviticus 25. This is the terms. You want to agree to this? This is what I'm laying out to you. Accept it or don't. List of witnesses. In a normal treaty, they would call on each other's gods to, if I violate this terms and conditions, then I will lose the house and you'll take back all my money and whatever. They would call on their gods. So we have the witnesses. And Deuteronomy 31, I think it's verse 28, God calls on heaven and earth as witnesses. Basically calls on himself. There's no other higher authority than himself. But heaven and earth is a way of saying his creation. There's blessings and curses. And this coming Sunday, I'm actually preaching on that for Leviticus 26. In any stipulation, if you agree to do this and you follow through, then you get to keep the house and you get equity and all that. If you don't, then you lose the house and there's late payment fees and there's blessings and curses. Deposition of the treaties. Each party would get a copy of the stipulations, at least the 10, the big ones. And they would go under the footstool of whatever God they had. And every year they would be brought out and read for everybody to hear. That was standard treaty terminology. So I still think when Moses brought down the 2 tablets, it was the suzerain copy and the vassal copy. And both those copies went in the footstool of God in the Ark of the Covenant. Then the oath ceremonies, we had that, and the treaty meal. I think I brought that out to you the time that they went up the mountain, and Moses and Joshua and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, which came up again this time. These are the guys that got whacked. They were on the mountain with God. They saw God and the 70 elders that had their meal together. Those are all standard features of the Suzerain Treaty. So there again, I've mentioned your default microphone has been default microphone. I guess, are you guys hearing me okay? A little screen thing coming up here. All right. The rest of the world understood suzerain vassal treaties. There were other things, parity treaties, but they understood this. As I said before, there's this singularity of Israel in a multicultural world. So the rest of the culture would understand the suzerain vassal treaty, but there's something different about this. That's what the other page is, the uniqueness of God's. In this case, God was going to be the divine suzerain. He was going to be their God and their king, the nation's king. Every time a new king came to the throne, he had to issue laws which would show his wisdom. Solomon had all these laws and his judgments, and oh, what a wise king Solomon is. Every king from every nation would send out these rules and regulations. So not only was God saying the stipulation for the treaty, but as the nation's king, he also issued these rules and regulations like any king would do. He'll be their sole God. They'll be freed from serving all the other gods. I mean, not only did you have your national God that you had to give 10% to, the river god, the tree god, the family gods, you had all these gods you had to pay tribute to and honor and respect and be afraid that if you called the river god against me so I couldn't fish anything, then I had to make an appeasement to the river god to fight you off, and I'd have a protection. I mean, they lived in this world of pantheon of gods and protection from gods and all that. God said, forget about that. You don't have to worry about any other gods. I'll take care of it. The other thing, he said, I will live among you. This was unique. No suzerain ever lived among the people. And he is Lord of all the earth, not just the big dog. He is it. And he's all knowing. He's going to watch to see if you carry out the stipulations or not. And he will enforce the treaty. And this is eternal. He will never die. You'll never have to make a covenant with another suzerain. And he's concerned about personal righteousness and inner purity. The other kings, when they became kings and they issued their laws, a lot of them, you've heard of Code of Hammurabi. That's the big one you learn about in school. These were a lot of social laws, which actually protected people. The difference was if you're royalty and you did something to a commoner, well, there's a penalty because they're just commoners. If a royalty kills another royalty, that's a life for a life. In Yahweh's case, no, I don't care if you're royalty or not. Life is life. And so there's a singular difference. If a commoner, well, that's a good example. And also about the inner purity. Shouldn't covet a neighbor. That's an inner thing. Number 8, it's concerned about the treatment of the powerless. Very few kings had rules about the poor and the disadvantaged. There is archaeological evidence of some kings who said if a foreigner, the phrase, if a foreigner comes to live in our borders because of famine, we are to allow him to have food and treat him like one of the people. So there were other stipulations in other kings that laid this out. And, you know, it shouldn't be surprising because, who went down to Egypt during the famine? It was understood. If Egypt has a famine, you go to the Philistines, you can live there during the famine. You know, so that was there. Loves them, wants to love them, wants them to love him. In the other rules and regulations, the other gods, you may have heard me say this before, the gods created people to be their slaves. They didn't want to have to feed themselves, so they created people to make the food to feed them. They didn't care about them at all. They were slaves. If they live or die, if you're advantageous to me to serve you, you keep me well fed, give me a nice temple, I'll protect you. Otherwise, I don't care, I'll destroy you. God says, no, I love you. I created you to be in a relationship with me. And he's a gentle overlord. Deuteronomy 30:11, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. Have you heard that somewhere else before? Yeah, but this is, again, it's how singularly unique God is even though he's using this vassal treaty, which is universally understood in their era. Okay, moving along. Okay, did that. Here's the temple. Just give you an idea of the size of it. There's a guy. Whoop, yeah, didn't get it out. If you can see the high priest there. And I thought about that because when he was bloodstained, there's a lot of blue there. Probably hid a lot of it, but there's the size of them compared to the entire tabernacle while they were in the wilderness. And again, here's the biggest one, 2 football fields in length. These different temples. There's Yahweh's temple. He ain't worried about size. He got the power. He can be in the midst of the people, but that's what he's got. And we come across the Urim and Thummim. I can't even pronounce it. What do they look like? What are they? We don't really know. We know there were 2 stones. They went in the ephod, which is the chest plate that the priest wore, and they were used for making determinations and things like that. But they could have been anything like that. They could have been completely different. The idea was as it rolled, it's basically rolling a dice, to put it in most simple terms. And do you see the wisdom of that? You see the brilliance of rolling the dice? We had 2 people. They're both willing to serve on a certain committee. They're both equally qualified. They'll both do a great job. So they're going to campaign for the position, pitting against each other. Well, I'm better than them, this competition. You got 2 people, a roll of dice. We'll leave it to God. It's not our decision. God decided. Odds or evens. Oh, it's even. You're the boss. You're in. Yeah, it's just trusting God for the answer. I mean, if you come to that, we have 2 excellent choices. What do we pick? Roll the dice. Should we go left or right? I don't really know. These people say we should go right. These people say we should go left. We can't make a consensus. Roll the dice. Oh, we're going right. Then it's like you were right or wrong. We left it to God. And we'll just keep our faith in God that whichever way we go, we'll be blessed. I think there's tremendous. I've never had a church willing to do that with me, but I've been pressing it for like the last 5 churches. Can we just roll dice? Like, no, we can't do that. It's biblical. And you've been reading a lot about diet restrictions. For fish, they have to have fins and scales. Except tuna. Somehow tuna's kosher. And anytime it's ever come up in conversation, the rabbis just said, never mind. All right. So
they couldn't eat tuna.
They can. Oh. Yeah, but it doesn't have scales. It has fins, but it doesn't have scales. And it's kosher. Oh, and Fauci was right. Where am I with this? Which one did it? About, it's the idea when they, if they're contaminated, they have to cover their face and unclean. Of course, they all have to tear their clothing and have their hair all disheveled. But he was onto something there because you're not allowed to.
I don't think that was his read.
I had all kinds of little notes on that too, and now I can't find it. Yeah, I thought he's wearing 2 masks just to be safe. All right, we'll move on from there. But yeah, yeah. And this bothered me. This we're going to get to the sheep and the goats things. I was looking for images of the sheep and the goat, and that's what I come up with all the time. And it comes out like a cute little story about the sheep and the goat, because this is what we teach in Sunday school. We don't want to get the kids offended, and we just do this, and here's the good sheep, and here's the goats, and yeah, except this is more what it's like. This whole idea of separating the sheep from the goats go to eternal punishment. It's not a cute little story. I must have gone through 50 different images trying to find something. This one up here was the standalone, was the closest thing. And even that's not really threatening. You have the angels there and the separation. He was making this point at the end of the time. And that sort of should drive our evangelistic faith-sharing attitude, because we have some good friends who are goats. And if they continue to do that and claim to be Christians, and they expect to get in, and Jesus is going to say, well, no, you never fed me, you never clothed me, you never cared for me. When did you see you like that? The first part, here's what separates us from social gospel. When Jesus congratulates the sheep, and they said, when did we see you naked or hungry? He said, when you've done this to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, my fellow Christians, you've done it for me. Now, social gospel says the least of these. So everybody in the whole world, just feed everybody, clothe everybody, just give them food, good food, because Jesus said so. You've specifically said you've done this to the least of these, my brothers and sisters. We've got persecuted Christians all over the world. What are we doing for them? They're in jail. They're being imprisoned. They're being beaten. What do we do about them? Do we care? I was in prison, and you never cared for me. When do we see you in prison? These are my brothers and sisters who are suffering in Laos, in China, and North Korea, and in Colombia, and all over. Way to go! You comforted me when I was in prison. Come on in. You did nothing to help me. So I think it bothers me because I guess I'm evangelical, and then I really take seriously the idea that there is such a thing as hell, and we turn it into that kind of a message. Then the last thing I think I have on here is this passage, my God, why have you forsaken me? I think that was today's reading. And I've heard people say that is Jesus. He's just absolutely, completely destroyed. He feels left behind by God. And what they're missing is in the Jewish tradition, if you go to Psalm 22, if you want to, because that's where I'm going. If they knew the scriptures, they knew the Psalms, they had recited them so many times. So someone could start the first part of a psalm and everybody would know the entire thing. And that sounds strange to you, but think about music. My country, 'tis of thee. You can keep going with it, right? So when he starts out with, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's verse 1 from Psalm 22. And it is due. David was totally dejected. There's no question about that. He's totally torn apart. He's feeling rejected by God. It's, my God, I cry out day by night. You don't answer. I find no rest. Yet, by verse 3, you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I'm a worm, I'm not a man. I'm scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they said. Let the Lord rescue him. Like right out of the New Testament there. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for troubles are near. There's no one to help me. Many bulls around me, strong bills of Bashan encircle me, roaring lions that tear their prey, open their mouths wide against me. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax, it's melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to the roof of the mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. Now, that's rather prophetic. All my bones are on display. And after a whipping like the centurions would have done, his ribs would have been showing. People stare and gloat over me. There you go. They divide my clothes among them and cast their lots for my garment. Okay. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him, revere him. All you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him. He has listened to his cry for help. From you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive, posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. That's a whole lot more than, oh my God, you've forsaken me, I'm done. Bringing out that psalm, I mean, it's, yes, I am despised. I can't imagine being more tore up than I am now. Even yet, you are my God. You've been my God the whole time. You will see me through this. I will praise you in the assemblies. That's a whole nother powerful message. If all you see is that, and you just feel he's just totally rejected and died. Even on the cross, he's atoning to the power, is attesting to the power of God. And I just thought, that doesn't get talked about enough. I've heard other preachers talk about it and kind of basically he's totally lost and hopeless. Every Jewish person would have understood the entire psalm, and that would have come to mind, just like we remember the national anthem. Last thing is the temple being torn in two. That is a 60-foot high curtain, 30 feet wide in Solomon's, in this temple rather, the King Herod's temple. 60 feet high, I'm doing the screen, 60 feet high and 30 feet wide, torn from top to bottom. And layers, not just a sheer veneer, it was just layers of curtain there. And it gives you a little image too of the lights and the showbread and stuff. Okay, your turn. Your turn. What do you got? Well, something to think about, but you think about it later.
I have a question.
Yes.
But it's not about this lesson.
We may take it, we may not. Go ahead.
Esther,
Esther.
the word God is not mentioned.
But yes, okay.
Why?
There's been a debate among rabbis for a long time. There's some people didn't want it in the Bible at all. I think Martin Luther didn't want it in the Bible because God is not mentioned. And yet you see God working through things all along. It just so happened that Mordecai was sitting out there. It just so happened that Esther was selected. It just so happened that the villain, I think his name escapes me now. Haman. Boo, everybody goes boo when you hear Haman. He was a mortal enemy of the Jews. And it just so happened that Mordecai overheard the story about the attempted king. And it just so happened that the king never rewarded him. I mean, it's just all these things like, but we call them God incidences. Other people call them God winks. That God is moving all through that story. God is setting things up and making things happen. So they never actually say, I called on God and he answered me. But God did this and God did this and God moved the story forward to save his people, which is the implication is even if we don't hear a voice from God, when these God incidences happen, we should remember them and praise God for it. That whole story of Esther, they don't say God, but still he's all through that. We give glory to God for his saving his people.
Who wrote Esther?
I did. It was a previous life. I don't know. we think. No, we don't know. We don't know. We think it was written down after the first exile, but there's no author to it, so we don't know. And certainly the story was kept and recorded before someone actually wrote it down in the form that it's in our scriptures now. So it's not like, 50 years went by and said, we ought to write this down. They had they were crazy for records. Look at what you're reading through Leviticus now. And this is what you do when that happens. Unless that happens, unless she's like this, then you can't do that. They were meticulous about it. And it wasn't just the Jewish people. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, what we're finding in archaeological records, they were detailed about things. So who actually wrote it? We don't know. But it's a part of the history. Yeah. That was an easy one. I figured, what's she going to ask?
Because Esther had them pray for 3 days, so they were praying to somebody.
Yeah. And the fact that you were Jewish means you're praying to Yahweh. I mean, everybody knew That's why they offended so many people. They wouldn't pray to their gods.
Well, it just so happened, remember when the Israel came into the Holy Land, they were told to kill all the children?
Everybody.
Goes, "Look, who was one of the children that survived that they didn't kill? It was Haman.
Thank you.
Well, this was sometime the people lived.
Right.
We didn't get to Joshua yet, so I want to hold off on that. But I'll just very briefly address this. There's a lot of wars in Africa today, tribal wars. There's a lot of refugees in Africa. Why is that?
You want to be in the war.
When war comes, the average person beats feet. They run, they're refugees. So everybody knows about Israel coming to this promised land. They know the decree. They know how they tramped all over Egypt. The people left. So who's left behind? The warriors, the kings that have a vested interest that want to fight. But the refugees scattered every which way like cockroaches leaving a burning building. I mean, they were out of there. So there weren't that many people to come in. Whoever was left behind were the ones who were fighting hard and kill them all. That was what they did in those days. Proof of that was after Joshua comes in with his armies and they beat the 6 kings to the south, and then they beat the 12 kings to 10 kings of the north. And then later on, I mean, they took Jerusalem. Later on, David has to take Jerusalem because from the Jebusites. Who were the Jebusites? They were foreigners. How'd they get Jerusalem? It even mentions in there, God says, I'm not going to clear all the land at once because there's too few of you. It'll be overrun with wild animals. So they officially took control of the whole nation, but there weren't enough of them. And what do the refugees do when war's over? They come home. So they repopulated Israel, and then they had the Jebusites took over Jerusalem. And so it's not like we invaded Mexico and came from north to the south and south to the north and just annihilated everybody there. You knew the war was coming, people leave. They do that forever. They do it today. They've done it for centuries. Anybody from this week's reading?
Yeah. Leviticus 19.
Okay.
When you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit trees, regard it as fruit is forbidden. And then for 3 years, you can consider it forbidden and you're not supposed to eat it. In the 4th year, it'll be holy, and that's an offering to the Lord. But in the 5th year, you may eat it. Doesn't that seem a little? I mean, I just found that fascinating. They weren't allowed to eat it for 5 years. You really had to plan ahead.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I do know from what I've read about trees and still horticulture. When you plant a tree, it's kind of a shock. Don't expect anything. 2nd year, maybe, but probably not. Trees have a cycle of good years and bad years. So it may not be a good year for that tree. Let it alone. Don't mess with it. It might take 3 years until it actually starts producing anything. By the 4th year, you should have a good crop. 3rd or 4th year. After that, go ahead. You'll know more about the pattern of its. But trees have this on and off year cycle. Now, genetic engineering, I don't know what they've done with that, but organically, naturally, they have that cycle. So, and there again, it comes up in the Bible with, remember the guy that had a fig tree that was in the garden, didn't produce anything? Fig trees do not go in the garden. Fig trees are planted, they grow. This guy took a fig tree and put it inside his garden where it's cultivated and protected. And for 3 years, and the husbandman, the gardener said, just give it 1 more year. We planted it. 2nd year, it was still in shock. The 3rd year might have been an off year for it. But 1 more chance. If not, then we'll tear it up. So that's where I first learned this idea of on and off cycles for trees. Yeah. Hey, modern theology. I've heard also someone say, well, you know what the gardener is going to do next year? Oh, come on, boss, 1 more year, 1 more year. It's like, that was Jesus' point was, we'll give you this extra grace, but then it's over. This just doesn't go on forever and ever and ever. There comes an end, and that was his point with the tree. Modern theology. Oh, well, it will just keep on extending the grace.
This clean
The parable of the sheep and the goats.
The very next verse, do not eat any meat with blood still in it. Okay, I guess nobody's eating rare steaks anymore.
I don't.
No.
I don't either, but I know people that do.
Well, actually, the blood in it, I mean, you say, I want to see it bleeding, but you're really not. They butcher those animals, they bleed them out.
Yeah.
It's just raw meat. But it's not the same as the blood in it yet. Yeah, they do bleed them out. And you know why? You're not supposed to eat the blood.
Right.
Yeah. Never, medium is about as good as I can go. I never go for raw. It's just, whatever.
Yeah.
This clean and unclean stuff, why was it evening when people became clean again? Why evening?
Yeah, it's the end of the day. A new day starts in the sundown. So basically, you're unclean for the rest of the day.
Oh, is that all it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When they have their Shabbat, it starts at sundown with the blessing or the meal, and that's the 24-hour period until the next sundown.
Oh.
So you're unclean for the rest of the day. That's kind of, yeah.
And do not make two different kind of animals.
Yeah. Yeah. What is a mule?
Yeah.
Yes.
And they did that back then, right?
How many people have blended fabrics?
Yes, exactly.
You know, okay, one thing, these are their laws, not ours. We said that before. So we're not bound by that. We are allowed to have blended fabrics, thank you, you know.
Well, cotton and wool would not shrink well together.
But even so, the mixing of fabrics was something done for the priest's clothing and royalty. And no commoner was supposed to mix clothing. That was for royalty and priests. The idea of mixing animals and putting two different kinds of seeds, that is the realm of the gods for creating animals. So to experiment, to do something like that would be taking religious, holy authority away from the gods. And again, in their other cultures, they also thought the gods were responsible for creating the animals. So I wouldn't be surprised to find those same regulations in other cultures. But the idea was, and I'm probably, mules had already existed. They didn't invent the idea. Somewhere a horse and a donkey, you know, just got together and, oh, look at this. So it's not like, hey, let's try this. But as far as trying to manipulate biometrical engineering and stuff, that's the realm of gods, not humans. And that was the idea of the clothing. I couldn't figure that either. I know a lot of these that are really hard to understand have their roots in pagan religions. There was something about the kid and his mother's milk, and blending the parent and the offspring together in a meal with some kind of ritualistic implications. And God says, don't do that. If you're gonna boil a kid, don't boil it in its mother's milk. That's against the law. That same section is really interesting because I've had people who are Bible thumpers that went about tattoos.
Yeah.
Where is that?
That's right
Right
now,
there.
1928.
Yeah, do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. The simplest or the easiest explanation is those tattoo marks and marks for the dead. So when someone was grieving, they'd lacerate themselves and they'd mark the name of their God. They'd mark the person's name when they'd tattoo for the dead. A more strict sense is a tattoo of any kind. God says, no, I created you. This is the body I created. I don't want you to do art all over it. It's like drawing on a Picasso. You're my creation. You're beautiful as you are. No, do not tattoo. So that's the more extreme end of it. But the more liberal interpretation is that it's markings for the dead and tattooing for the dead. Or to tattoo to honor the gods. Certain religions have marked their face and tattoo up as it's a symbol. So no, don't do that. I don't want you to do that to your body at all. But then again, it says these Bible thumpers. See, right there, verse 28, you're not supposed to have a tattoo. Go up to verse 27.
Mhm.
Do you clip the edges of your beard?
Exactly, trim your hair.
Yeah, well, right there, it says it, you're not supposed to do that.
Yes.
You're gonna pound the table over that verse, go up a verse and pound the table over that.
Not supposed to trim your beard, trim the side of your head. I don't know. We follow some, but don't follow others. Why is it?
It also says in there somewhere about do not shave, no, don't shave your head, I think it is, somewhere, I remember reading it.
I do too.
Something about spots or.
I don't remember where it's at now.
Yeah,
I've never
stand
seen
up
it.
in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly. Right there in verse 32. We've been getting up and down all the time when people come into church. Oh, he's older than me. How you doing? Yeah. Those are their laws, they're not our laws. What's the reason behind the law? What's the reason behind the stand up in the presence of elders? It's a sign of respect. Respect your elders. Don't shave the corners because that's what the other pagans did that. That was part of their religious ritual. In Egypt, they would shave their heads and shave their whole body, except the priests. The priests would a little bit of patch of hair grow off on the side. And it was something making them the child of, the son of, the sign of infancy, in a sense. So don't shave the corners. Don't do anything like that. That's ritualistic, no good. Yeah.
Is there anything wrong with putting holes in your ears and your nose and
Not according to this.
the tongue?
Not
How many-
according to this.
How many farmers don't go all the way down to their field? You're supposed to let the corners of your field go and whatnot,
Yeah, yeah.
but I don't see anybody does that.
There's your social justice. It didn't say, hey, there's poor people, harvest everything and give a tenth of it to the poor. Hey, they're hungry, give them something, let them go work. Let them go harvest their own grain and give them something to eat. Don't go back over the second time for your fruit. Leave that for the poor people to go work and harvest some food. Didn't say give them food, it said make it available. Don't be so tight-fisted. Let them work for it, you know. But yeah, that was all part of God's separating him from most any other vassal treaty, the concern for the poor that they're taken care of. And especially if it's a Jewish brother or sister, you see the poor, you help them out. It was legal if you're walking through a fruit orchard or something, you pick a fruit off and eat it, you can do that. That was legal. You couldn't take a basket and start harvesting, that was illegal. But if you're walking through and there's figs, you grab a fig, nothing wrong with that at all. That was acceptable. They were travelers, they were foreigners, they were people who go for days on journey. You come across an apple orchard, there's an apple, grab an apple, keep walking, eat your apple. Don't fill your backpack with it, now you're stealing his product. And logically, that makes sense. You hungry? Hey, have a piece. You know, it's a gracious thing to do. Have some. Yeah.
Touched on a little bit earlier about what they were allowed to eat and not eat, like the fish with scale. And I thought like cloven animals would bet you they're cut versus
Yeah.
just how specific that all is.
Yeah. A lot of those distinctions, again, I couldn't find details for each one, but there were the first thing is what were the pagan religions doing, for one thing. And other things that have to do with being underground and carnivores had to do with death and the underworld. So you don't eat animals that burrow underground because that has to do with the underground and afterlife and that sort of thing. And you don't eat animals that are predators because they're part of what happened when nature got messed up. And you don't be a part of that. It wasn't a real detailed explanation, but the idea was the falcon and the vultures and the eagle and stuff like it. No, because they're the predator animals and birds. You don't eat them. The hoof, I don't know. Every religion had some dietary restrictions. More than that, I can't answer you.
I'm just curious.
But they did not have any idea about hygiene. They didn't know about germs. They didn't know any of that. But they saw patterns. And other religions also had hygiene regulations. God was very specific about what he wanted, how to live. because the people, God was in their midst. And he wanted them to be around him. He couldn't have this impurity with him there. So anybody with a scale, with the disease and stuff, they knew about communicable diseases. They didn't know what caused it. But they knew that if you have that and my wife gets it and my neighbor gets it, it's like, wait, we got a problem here. So, all right, first off, 7 days. Get them out, get them isolated. Check them out again. Okay, they're good, they grew, whatever. I love the idea too of the house. And when they say mold or whatever, I don't know what translation you got. Basically, it's all the same. If there's a growth on the skin, patchy growth, or if it's a growth on the house, of course, they're different things. They didn't know that. But I think this is by grace of God. Before the priest comes in to determine if it's contaminated or not, get everything out. Otherwise, you lose your entire household. If he walks in and says, yep, that's contaminated, everything in here is in quarantine, he just lost all your household products. It's rather gracious to say, you know what, get it out of here before the priest shows up. And that's written into the stipulations. And the critics of the Old Testament are looking at how harsh everything is. But if you're looking at it from the heart of God, you look for the grace. Where's the graceful stuff of God coming in? It's softer than their world. If you understand their culture and what they were living in, God shows himself over and over again to be very gracious. What else you got?
How did the priests learn about all that? Like mold, did they just from experience?
Well, God through
It's
Moses,
for God.
if they didn't know, some of the stuff was probably known beforehand, but.
Because they had to know a lot of like all the diseases, mold.
Yeah.
They know a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Do you know the word parson, what it means? What's a parson?
Yeah, your uncle.
Last name Parson?
Yeah.
No, I mean, hey, Parson. That's me,
Preacher?
preacher.
Oh,
Hey, Parson. Where did the word parson come from for being preacher? It's a slang on person. You're the person. You're the man. You're the man. In any culture in America in colonial times and growing up like that, there were very few people educated. Some people could read, but most weren't educated at all, any kind of thing. In the early church, preachers were educated in what they knew about medicine and science. They had more than just theological education. So if you had a question, you go see the man. You go see the person, the parson. Priests were expected to know more than the average person. And they were supposed to say, and also they think this is God causing it or not. So you go to the person who knows, and they are schooled in identifying what to look for. Because they didn't have, they had witches, they weren't allowed to have those, but they didn't really have a doctor school. So this is kind of like early America, the preacher was the only one that's been to school. He's been educated. He knows things that average person doesn't know. That-
Humorous note, this preacher happens to have been a nurse.
Yeah. So nursing for 18 years. Yeah.
Back on the animals, do you suppose that like pigs carried all kind of nasty diseases, trichinosis, all that kind of stuff? Do you think that was part of the thing about not eating them?
I think that might have been God's wisdom, just
Yeah.
like the different animals, the burrowing animals, and
I mean, that's what I always thought. That was the reason why God
yeah,
said, no, you don't touch that.
yeah, and the carnivore, you don't eat them. Maybe they ate a rabid animal. Maybe they're diseased, and so an animal that eats other animals, like no, stay away from them. The hygiene stuff, take it outside the camp and bury it. You got a number two. They didn't know about disease. I mean, we didn't know that until Lister, who are the guy that discovered that. Yeah. So a lot of this, God's looking out for his people, giving them wisdom way beyond anybody even knew what was going on there.
I think this from last week. There's chapter 12. Yeah. If a woman gave birth to a son, she was unclean for 7 days.
yes.
Yeah.
And what was it? She must wait 33 days.
Yes. I had that
33
written down
days
on
to
the
be
paper.
purified.
There it is.
If she gives birth to a daughter, it's 2 weeks instead of 7 days and 66 days to be purified.
Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. They valued men more than women. Women were simply the earth that the seed got planted into. And just think of it that way. They didn't understand X chromosomes and Y chromosomes. They totally thought that the person came from the man. Just like if you have an apple seed and you put it into the ground doesn't produce the apple tree, the seed does. The ground is just the vehicle that the seed grows in. And that was their complete understanding about a woman. She was simply the fertile soil in which the seed grew until it surfaced. So they did place more value on men than women. It was a higher price. You'd think in any case that it would take longer for her to be purified, but it's the other way around. And again, someone else had mentioned this to me, that when she was in her impurity, she didn't have to go to the temple. She didn't have to do any kind of extra stuff. She could sit around the tent and do nothing. So after
Then doesn't
childbirth,
sit where she sat. Or
Yeah.
then you're
Right.
and she was, so that part of the room was like, don't mess with her. She's impure. Leave her alone. Like, leave me alone. Leave me alone. And they had. So yeah, I knew men were valued. Not that women were not valued. And one of the things about God's stipulations, women were often lifted up where men weren't, where they were not lifted up in other treaties. There were a lot of other treaties that said if you disrespect your father, you deserve death. God says you disrespect your mother or your father, you deserve death. He elevated women in his law more than any of the other religion rules and regulations did, either from their gods or from the kings. I don't think we got to it yet, but there's a stipulation. If you go to war now with the other, now, once you clean everybody out, you go to war and there's a woman and you think she's attractive, you're not allowed to have sex with her for 30 days. You have to let her shave her head. Hair was a beautiful thing. You let her shave her head, let her mourn for her parents for 30 days. Then if you still want her, then you can have her. And if she doesn't please you, you can't just throw her away because you violated her. That was unheard of. The whole ritual back then, an invading army comes and they rape the village. God says, no, let her mourn 30 days and let her cut her hair off too. You still think she's beautiful? A month has gone by. You still want her? Okay. That was incredibly kind to foreigners, women at that. Unheard of. So, that's horrible. Make her shave her head, and then he gets to the alternative was just rape and pillage. So, yeah, there's a lot of places where in our culture today we look back that whole the culture that's going on today, but understand those people in their culture in their times. Like I said last week, God was not laying out the perfect society for people to live in with these rules and regulations. He was saying, this is how you live in this day and age in this part of the world. These are my rules and regulations for living there in that time. Yeah, so, and it's a lot kinder to women and children and orphans than other cultures. Well, that was chapter 13:45. They had to yell out, unclean, unclean. Isolation, contamination. Fauci. Face covering, interior clothes, don't comb your hair. That would isolate a lot of people, wouldn't it? I mean, it's like, it's okay. Get a breath mint. Cut down on contamination. Cross. Leviticus 14, and I'm not sure which one this is, but it's one of those stipulations, verse 21, where it says, this is what you have to do. But if you're poor, forget that. Just do this instead. There's several regulations where this is what you have to do, except if you can't afford it, okay. then just do this. It's graceful of God. Not to put an unnecessary burden. Yeah, verse 36 was the one that emptied the house first.
Exodus 20 seems like, how could you want to?
Leviticus 20, takes what?
Oh, I'm sorry, Leviticus
Okay.
20. I'm looking at it and said, how could you offer your child to Moloch when you were in God's camp? That's just bizarre to me.
Well, these are also rules and regulations for when you move into the new land. They didn't have houses back then. They were all living in tents.
Right.
But here's the rule. If you have mold in your house, this is what you have to do.
No, Moloch.
No. I'm saying this, because how could they do that when they're living in tents? These are the rules and regulations for the Jews now and as they move into the promised land.
So when you move into the promised land, don't sacrifice.
Yeah, we just talked about the mold thing on the house. They didn't have houses, they were living in tents. But when you do move in and you get a house and this happens, this is how you treat the mold. So these were rules for more than just the time in the wilderness. This is God laying out his stipulations for the relationship now and forever. And I personally, you can hate me if you want to. I think abortion's murder. And what do they do with the aborted babies? They're burnt as biohazard waste. How many children are we sacrificing in Moloch, sending them through the fire? Statistically, 1 in 5. 18 years ago, it was 1 in 4. The abortion rate's down now, but 1 in 5 children are sacrificed for the convenience of having a father with a kid. Oh, what about the hardships, the medical? A tiny little fraction. So how could they do that? I think we're doing it today. Sending them through the fire. Bummer, come on, something fun here. Find something interesting. Tattoos serves as foreigners. Leave something for the poor, right? Yeah. How long did it take them when Moses went up the mountain until they formed another God? He was gone less than 40 days when it started happening because it was 40 until he came back down. And they just saw what he did to the Egyptians. He trounced every god they had, parted the sea, gave them manna, and now they want to create their own gods.
With that about when he went up there and they made that idol, I was really surprised that God didn't punish Aaron.
Yeah.
Because he's the one that said, bring your stuff here and make that didn't make sense to me.
He was well, he got merciful. Yeah, he got off pretty well scot-free.
I mean,
Then he lied too, didn't he?
Yeah. I love the audacity. I just threw it in and out came this camp. Wow, it popped up, I didn't do anything. It's like I was born at night, but not last night. Huh. Yeah, he did. He didn't get
because
punished.
his 2 sons, they got close to the
Yeah.
They died.
No, God was on a mountain at that point when Aaron did that down
Right.
below, right? When Nadab and Abihu did this is, I am giving you the rules. This is how you worship me. I am holy. I am pure. You will obey my rules. You're doing what? Zap. They took on holy fire. Like, it doesn't really matter. Any fire from any place, we'll throw some incense and we'll do our thing. Sloppy. God was very offended with that. And right behind that, Aaron was supposed to eat the meat, and he didn't. He goes, God just said you have to do this. And Aaron said, would God really be pleased like this? Moses said, yeah, okay. So on one hand, God is very strict with the rules. On the other hand, he doesn't punish Aaron for not eating the sacrificial meat. Where's the attitude behind it? Where's the heart behind that? Nadab and Abihu were sloppy. They knew the rules. They just didn't care. And God punished that. Aaron was like, I just lost half my kids. I'm too tore up to eat. I can't do this. God said, sorry, it's okay.
But the next 2 sons followed the rules to the T.
Yeah. And it's I mentioned before, like this plutonium, the fact that the God of the universe was going to be present in the middle of their camp. He was saying, do not mess around with this. I am serious about this. You will not contaminate my presence. It will cost you. Yeah. And somewhere in scripture, it says all this was given for our benefit. God can be like God will do what he will do. I will have mercy on who I will have mercy. Understand that when I say something, I expect you to do it. This is the stipulation of the covenant. You want to buy the house? Here's the stipulation. You want to buy a car? Here's the stipulation. You want me to be your God? Here's the stipulation. And Joshua says this when you move in the promised land at the end of Joshua. Choose today who you'll serve, God or the God of the other nations. Take your pick. Jesus says that today. At least as Methodists, we believe you have a choice. Take your pick. You don't have to honor me now. You can ignore me now. But if you're going to be my people, then do what I tell you. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. Do good things to people that hurt you. That's not a request. It's a stipulation of a new covenant. And we, like Nadab and Abihu, go, well, it doesn't really matter. I'll love my friends and I'll hate my enemies and I'll just do snarky things to them. And, I don't really care. Grace of God over and over again, gently calling us back. But these are the stipulations. This is the new covenant under Jesus Christ, covered in the blood. But it's still a covenant. There are still stipulations. If you love me, you will memorize the Bible. Is that what your Bible says? If you love me, you'll be a United Methodist. My Bible says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you don't keep my commandments, obviously you don't love me. If you love me, I'll love you, and Father will love you too. If you don't, it's your choice. We're trying to convince people that it's better to do that in this life and the next. That's our challenge. If we're going to share our faith, we're talking to people that don't really worry about heaven and hell. They live to be 80, 90 some years. They're not thinking about death. What will God do for me in this life? If we're going to share our faith and convince people to come worship him, what benefit is there here on this side of the veil? I'm convinced that's our challenge in the 21st century. Previous generations, they all believed in gods, just which one? And then they grew up in America, they knew there were churches, they knew there was a God, they just fell away. So all an evangelist had to do was convince them that they were going to hell and they didn't want to, so send them to a church and off you go. And we got 3 or 4 generations with no church, no religion. You're not going to scare the hell out of them. That's what the old pulpit pounders used to do. Fire and brimstone. You didn't go to heaven because you wanted to. You didn't want to go to hell. Even John Wesley said that doesn't work. And Martin Luther said the same thing. You can't make a man love God long if he's doing it out of fear. He's doing it out of fear of hell. There's no real love there. It's just rules and regulations. So how do we live the love? How do we project the love and convince people? Sociology, I'm going off of it. Anybody else? I'm going off of preaching again. All right. God is grace. God is so, but it is a covenant. And that's why I'm harping so much on this the old covenant. Jesus said, I didn't come to erase any of that. Not a jot, not a tittle, not one little stroke of the pen. It's all there. But understand it this way. Understand it under grace and love and mercy, and truth and righteousness. When he criticized the Pharisees, you guys tithe. You take 1/10 of your herbs from your garden. Good for you, but you're neglecting the greater things of justice and mercy and righteousness. Do one without neglecting the other. So they had the law part down. They missed the heart of God in it. And that's what we're still under the covenant. And we got to take God seriously. And we got to let people know about it so they come in too. Who would think the law of love is so tough? I guess in some ways it's easier to hate people than to love them. And we're all imperfect, so we all have reasons to hate people. God says, nah, not good enough. I died for that person. I think we're about out of time. Got anything else here? A lot of those sexuality laws that were in chapter 18 and repeated again in chapter 20, other cultures had those same things to an extent. No, you can't take your brother's wife. Oh, uncover their nakedness is what it says. It doesn't say you can have sex with them. You can't uncover their nakedness. If you uncover your mother's nakedness, it's an insult to your father. It's an uncover. And what about Noah? The youngest son went in there and uncovered his father's nakedness. The implication was he had sex with his mother. It was an insult to the father. That's why he cursed Canaan, the son, the offspring of that influence. But it's always uncovering the nakedness. It's just having sex with somebody dishonors the people. And illicit relationships bring shame. And that was other cultures had those things, not to the extent of this. We didn't protect the women like this did. But the other different codes, the ancient codes, they also had rules against, because it destroys society, it destroys culture. Husband and wife is the most intimate, unique bond there can be. You break that, you're breaking apart society. Family units. If you can't trust your father with your daughter, that's horrible. You have to have that built into society to have some concrete foundations, which is why Satan's so busy today in the world of sexual promiscuity. Tear it all apart. No boundaries. Anything goes.
They really went into detail.
Yes.
Every possible combination I think could happen.
And you know what, when you read in Leviticus and all the detail and all the things that they had to do constantly, and we get hung up now in the new covenant, what we have under Jesus, and it's easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So much easier.
And then it's like, and we mess that up. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. People have often said the hardest thing about keeping the understanding of Scripture isn't the obscure texts. It's the very simple one. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't cheat. Don't covet. Love. Love your neighbor. Love your wife. Love your spouse. Love your enemy. Do good things. That's not a 10-year-old could understand that. But the hardest things to do are the simplest things. Rejoice in the Lord when?
Always. Again.
I say, rejoice in the Lord always. How complicated is that? Do we need a lexical definition of that phrase? No. Yeah. That's where grace comes in, I guess. And our time is up. We're at the hour mark here, so we're going to sign off for now. For the internet, anybody stick around for more questions, that's fine. And I'll say goodbye, and I'm stopping the share.